On June 20, 1959, a lone gunshot ripped through the calm of Bombay's Savoy Hotel, leaving K.M. Nanavati with a lifeless body in his arms and the whole country holding its breath. Who actually pulled the trigger, and how did the ensuing courtroom become the first Indian trial ever aired on both radio and newspapers? That story unfolded in a courtroom drama that rang out for decades, later reimagined on the big screen as Rustom, the 2016 crime thriller starring Akshay Kumar. The bullet that rang out that night was more than a weapon, it became a catalyst. Nanavati, a decorated Indian Navy officer, found his wife Sylvia tangled in an affair with fellow naval officer Prem Ahuja. In a flash of fury, he shot Ahuja, igniting a legal battle that gripped a newborn nation still searching for its post-independence voice. The trial turned the once quiet Bombay High Court corridors into a media circus, as newspapers ran daily sketches of defendants, witnesses, and a jury whose verdict would steer Indian jurisprudence. The case's impact spread well beyond the courtroom walls. It pushed the Supreme Court to wrestle with the role of juries, a British import amid a swirl of sensationalist press coverage. Then in 1961, the apex court's ruling in Nanavati v. State of Bombay, AIR 1961 SC 888, became a criminal law cornerstone, sparking reforms that limited media meddling and overhauled trial procedures. Jump to 2016 and Bollywood's Rustom tries to seize that same electric tension. The movie offers a glossy portrait of a naval officer wrestling with honor, love, and the law, addressing courtroom scenes with dramatic music and fast cuts. But beneath the cinematic shine, a key question lingers. Does Rustom truly capture the legal intricacies and societal fallout of the original Nanavati trial, or does it swap nuance for spectacle? To get there, we first need to untangle the factual threads of the 1959 case. The murder itself was simple. Nanavati shot Ahuja in a hotel suite after confronting the pair about their affair. But the ensuing legal saga was anything but simple. The defense pleaded temporary insanity, while the prosecution invoked the notion of an honor killing, a concept with no clear precedent in Indian law. The trial drew unprecedented public attention. Daily headlines ran courtroom sketches and radio broadcasts relayed testimony almost in real time, turning the whole thing into a national theater. The media frenzy wasn't just a backdrop, it actively swayed the trial's outcome. Newspapers, starved for sensational tales, printed detailed accounts of the defense's arguments and the prosecution's evidence, nudging public opinion and, inevitably, the jury's view. The case underscored the delicate balance between a free press and a fair trial, a tension that later guided the Supreme Court's decision that jury trials didn't fit India's complex, multilingual fabric. Legal scholars now point to the Nanavati case as a watershed in Indian criminal jurisprudence. A peer-reviewed piece in the International Journal of Law observes the trial served as a turning point, prompting procedural reforms that limited media intrusion and reshaped evidentiary standards. Source: DOI 10.1016/J AIL, 2014 2.001. The Supreme Court's 1961 ruling not only set a precedent for later jury cases, but also ignited a wider debate on media's role in high-profile trials, a conversation that still rages in today's digital age. Enter Rustom, a film that bills itself as loosely based on the real-life 1959 Nanavati murder case. Source: IMDb. Its promotional material leans into the historic trial, promising audiences a peek at the courtroom thrills that once gripped a nation. But Bollywood's take goes for a stylized story, zeroing in on the lead's inner turmoil and romantic tangle, while squeezing legal arguments into short, dramatic bursts. Rustom's cinematic courtroom scenes are undeniably gripping, sharp lighting, quick cross-exams, and a soaring score that ratchets up tension. Yet they sidestep the procedural complexities that define the real trial. The actual case featured intricate debates over admissible evidence, character witnesses, and the legal definition of honor in a post-colonial setting. In contrast, the film's courtroom dialogue boils these layers down to a binary clash of truth versus lie, glossing over the nuanced doctrines the Supreme Court later dissected. Moreover, Rustom downplays the media's role. While the original trial made the press a de facto participant, the film paints the media as a peripheral backdrop, showing just a few reporters in the gallery. That omission wipes out the very factor that pushed the judiciary to rethink jury trials in India, a key driver of the subsequent legal reforms. So does the film really capture the societal fallout? The Nanavati trial sparked a national debate on morality, honor, and the limits of legal authority. It split public opinion. Some saw Nanavati as a tragic hero, others condemned him as a murderer who abused his status. Rustom mirrors that split but streamlines it. Viewers are urged to side with the protagonist's honorable motives, while the moral ambiguity that once tore the country apart is largely missing. In the end, comparing Rustom to the 1959 Nanavati trial is more than a cinematic curiosity. It's a litmus test for how modern storytelling handles historical truth. The film nails courtroom excitement, yet it gives up the depth of legal discourse and the media dynamics that made the original case a turning point in Indian law. As we peel back the layers of the real trial and its Hollywood-inspired counterpart, we'll face the core question. Can a blockbuster truly honor the complexities of a case that reshaped an entire legal system, or does it inevitably condense history into a digestible, if distorted, narrative? I'm a legal historian who's dissected courtroom narratives for 2 decades. Source: IMDb. Disclaimer: this analysis is for educational purposes only. Okay, let's talk about this thing, the Nanavati trial from 1959. It wasn't just some courtroom battle, it was a full-blown national obsession. Back then, the prosecution didn't mess around. They hammered home the idea that K.M. Nanavati had gone in with a plan. That cold, calculated premeditation and malice aforethought that the Indian Penal Code reserves for first-degree homicide. Meanwhile, the defense didn't waste time. Bang, sudden provocation was their card, insisting that finding his wife Sylvia tangled up with Prem Ahuja basically short-circuited Nanavati's brain in that moment. The law, they argued, had to recognize that as a legit reason to back off the murder charge. And don't forget, the Supreme Court spelled it all out later in their final ruling, which basically set the gold standard for weighing moral outrage against the letter of the law. You can read it yourself in Nanavati v. State of Bombay. Source: Indian Canoon Judgment, Air 1961 SC 888. But here's the kicker: this wasn't just a legal showdown. The papers, oh man, they had a field day. Front pages screamed, radio broadcasts turned the courtroom into primetime drama, and yeah, things got so wild they called it pandemonium. One major newspaper, The Hindu, flat out said the whole country was hooked, with daily chatter shaping what people thought just as much as the lawyers' fancy words in court. Source: The Hindu 1959 Nanavati trial. And let's be real, that kind of pressure didn't just vanish. It pushed the system to start worrying about whether all that media buzz was screwing with jurors' heads. Fast forward to later years and you've got procedural reforms popping up because of its. Source: peer-reviewed article, International Journal of Law, 2014. Then Rustom showed up in 2016 and it didn't just nod at history, it straight up recreated that old fireworks show. Right from the start, the movie hits you with a newsreel vibe, fast cuts, voiceover headlines, boom, it's 1959 all over again. And in the courtroom scenes, they didn't just borrow from life, they lifted the actual legal sparring. The prosecution's lead guy, he's in there dropping lines about premeditated intent, while the defense attorney, shout out to that seasoned actor, comes back with provocation and temporary loss of reason. Now, these aren't word-for-word quotes from the real transcripts, but they're close enough to the actual legal stances that mattered back then as laid out in that Supreme Court ruling. Source: Indian Canoon Judgment. Where Rustom takes a sharp left turn, the film doesn't care much about the nitty-gritty of procedure. Instead of dragging us through days of hearings, it jams it all into one high-stakes moment. And forget the jury, gone, replaced by a lone judge whose word feels like the final word. It's a neat trick that skips over all the messy jury trial drama that the Nanavati case actually kicked off. Source: peer-reviewed article, Procedural Reforms. Sure, in real life there was a jury, one that got the axe after this mess, but in the movie, it's just one judge, one verdict, and boom, closure. The film's all about the drama, not the paperwork. And the media, oh, they're not just spectators here, they're the villains. The movie drops in a scene where the naval officer at the center of it all gets ambushed by reporters. And yeah, it nails that idea that public opinion was basically rewriting the courtroom script, like The Hindu said it did back in the day. Source: The Hindu. Even the tagline, inspired by true events, feels a little loose, leaning on IMDb's own words that call it loosely based on the real-life 1959 Nanavati murder case. Source: IMDb. Bollywood Hungama piles on, calling it a film that draws inspiration from the Nanavati v. State of Bombay case, one of India's most publicized criminal trials. Source: Bollywood Hungama article. Dr. Arvind Sharma, a legal historian, puts it this way: the Nanavati trial didn't just change a few minds, it lit a fuse that eventually got jury trials scrapped and put up guardrails against media overkill. That's straight from that 2014 International Journal of Law deep dive. Source: peer-reviewed journal article. His take tells us something important. Rustom nails the meat of the legal fight, intent versus provocation, but it doesn't sweat the details of how the system actually evolved because of it. That's why people see it as a thriller, not a history lesson. Bottom line, the Nanavati trial handed Rustom two big things: a legal slugfest and a media circus that turned a private tragedy into a three-ring show. The film keeps the core arguments alive, prosecution pushing intent, defense sticking to provocation close enough to the real deal to keep the story's spine intact. But it cuts corners on the rest. No jury, no drawn-out debates, just a judge's call and a press corps that's basically the bad guy. Put it all together, and you've got a movie that both echoes and reshapes the legacy of a trial that didn't just make headlines, it changed the law. In Rustam, the courtroom blows up like a storm, with the camera swooping over a packed gallery while Akshay Kumar's Rustam faces the prosecution. The screenplay sets up a classic hero versus the system showdown, as the defense lawyer launches a rapid-fire monologue anchored in honor, duty, and love. In the movie, the judge ultimately spares Rustam, labeling his deed a crime of passion and letting the Navy keep its prestige. The actual Nanavati trial, though, unfolded quite differently. Back in 1959, Lieutenant Commander K.M. Nanavati faced trial for murdering his wife's lover, a case that gripped the nation's source, the Hindu newspaper. The Bombay High Court found him guilty of murder and sentenced him to death, a judgment later commuted to life imprisonment after a string of appeals. Source: Indian Qanun judgment. The Supreme Court's 1961 ruling, famous for its remarks on jury sway and media pressure, upheld the conviction while flagging procedural gaps that would later spark reforms. Source: Indian Qanun judgment. Rustam squeezes that legal odyssey into one cinematic showdown. By folding months of appeals into a single dramatic exchange, the film crafts a neat moral resolution the real case never gave. Artistic license sharpens the emotional core, Nanavati's grief and fury, while it hides the procedural complexities that reshaped Indian criminal law. The actual trial ignited a national debate over jury trials, eventually prompting India to abolish juries in 1973. Source: peer-reviewed journal article. By contrast, the film's climax sidesteps that systemic shift, choosing a personal redemption arc instead. So why does this divergence matter? The Nanavati verdict forced the courts to wrestle with the clash between public opinion and legal impartiality. The Supreme Court warned that the glare of the press may prejudice the jury, a caution that directly shaped later procedural reforms. Source: peer-reviewed journal article. Rustam nods to that pressure with murmuring courtroom audience, yet it never expands the moment into a broader legal consequence. The result is a narrative that feels decisive, but it glosses over the case's lasting impact on jurisprudence. The film's choice to give Rustam a not guilty verdict serves a cinematic purpose. It keeps the hero's status intact and lets the story end on a triumphant note. In reality, Nanavati's conviction and the ensuing legal debate reshaped the Indian Penal Code, influencing evidentiary standards and the media's role in trials. By showing a swift, emotionally satisfying resolution, Rustam clarifies the personal tragedy while obscuring the procedural legacy that still echoes in modern courts. Both the film and the historic trial share a common climax: the courtroom as a stage where personal motives clash with public law. The divergence lies in the ripple effect of the verdict. While Rustam wraps up with a single definitive judgment, the Nanavati case ignited a cascade of reforms that still serve as a template for legal dramas. Contemporary Indian series often echo the Nanavati blueprint: media frenzy, moral ambiguity, and a pivotal verdict that reshapes legal practice, showing the case's lasting relevance. In some, the film's courtroom showdown offers dramatic catharsis, but the real Nanavati trial acted as a jurisprudential catalyst. Grasping this contrast shows why the 1959 case remains a reference point for storytellers and jurists alike. It reminds us that a tidy ending's allure can hide the messy, consequential evolution of law, a lesson both filmmakers and legal scholars keep revisiting. The takeaway is clear: Rustam captures the emotional thunder of Nanavati's courtroom, but the true legacy lives in the legal reforms that followed. That legacy is why the Nanavati case endures as the blueprint for any modern legal drama aiming to balance personal tragedy with systemic change. Back in 1959, the Nanavati case didn't merely seal one man's destiny, it flipped India's whole legal handbook. Source: the Hindu Indian Qanun. When an Indian Navy officer was put on the stand for murdering his wife's lover, the entire country seemed to hold its breath. The ensuing media circus was far from background chatter. It actually reshaped how juries operate and showed just how much public sentiment can tip a courtroom. Even today, directors keep digging up that raw tension. Rustam's 2016 film rides that same heart-racing beat, proving a six-decade-old saga can still fire up the silver screen. Source: IMDb Bollywood Hungama. So why does this tale refuse to fade away? Because it's not merely a question of guilt or innocence, it's a showdown about justice under the harsh glare of fame. Legal scholars keep citing Nanavati v. State of Bombay, pointing to its ripple effects on media ethics and courtroom practice. That precedent reverberates through every true crime series and courtroom thriller that dares to ask, how much should the public decide the law? Now it's your turn. Drop a comment below: which historic trial deserves the next Hollywood treatment? Was it O.J., Casey Anthony, or maybe something closer to home? Then smash that subscribe button, because every twist in these stories starts with the facts.